Hello there, I'm the Serial Plagiarist, and today I wanted to take a look at perhaps one of my biggest negative inspirations for this channel, Cosmotard Variety Hour. The guy who pretends he's a diehard Star Wars nerd when he couldn't even read a Star Wars children's book to save his life. Completely illiterate with the source material, expressing moronic, and completely unoriginal sentiment against Star Wars. The prequels ruined Star Wars, y'all. The Force Awakens was a new dawn. A narrative that a lot of absolutely stupid prequel haters spread, and it's factually incorrect. Now, I think it's best if I give myself a little introduction before his fans decide to rip on me for daring to speak up against their overlord. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, a channel dedicated to Star Wars, in more ways than just the movies, shows, and video games. If it has the Star Wars branding on it, I count it as a piece of the IP. You may call me a diehard Star Wars nerd who's really upset with someone who is pretending to be a diehard Star Wars nerd. In short, as the real deal, I'm obviously going to have no trouble spotting the fakes. Cosmotard often alludes to his so-called expanded knowledge of Star Wars, such as in his Return of the Jedi Sucks video. At the start, he talks about how he consumed every medium of Star Wars, including the books.
I love Star Wars books, games, movies, shows. It doesn't matter. I just like Star Wars a lot.
He then, in every other video in this one, doesn't bring up the books. He doesn't mention the Return of the Jedi novelization, or really any surrounding material, which is odd. The argument that he's not mentioning the books because he wants to keep his casual audience on the same page, though, doesn't really hold up. When you consider that in his initial Last Jedi defense video, he cited the Tarka novel by James Luceno to explain the hyperspace ramming plot hole. Aside from it being the only example of him demonstrating that he knows anything from the books, it's extremely lazy. To just use a book that the audience shouldn't be required to read, a novel that isn't even attached to the Last Jedi multimedia project like the novelization or the Canto Bight collection of short stories, likely suggested he couldn't come up with an effective explanation for hyperspace ramming in-universe, so he probably looked online, found a forum post or a quote somewhere linked to the Tarka novel, and copy-pasted it, since he provides no context for the passage in the novel. These things are super easy to spot, so as someone who is actually trying to read the novels, the comic books and stuff, I am insulted by someone like Cosmotard Variety Hour, who just claims higher knowledge with nothing to show for it. Cosmotard fans may not think of it, but reading all the Star Wars material actually takes a while. And as someone who struggles with certain writing styles, which many novels may contain, such as one of my current ventures, Jedi Search, it actually takes a lot of work to be educated about Star Wars. Cosmotard is not a diehard Star Wars nerd like he claims he is. He probably watched the movies, played a few of the games, and then watched the shows when streaming services became a thing. He probably couldn't tell you what a Jorah Sabayoth is, because let's face it, he lied about his credentials. I'm sick of being mocked about comparing credentials when it comes to Star Wars, because said people clearly don't understand how much passion it takes to actually go through all this stuff. Okay, so with that being said, I just wanted to debunk a couple of things people are going to say about me before it happens. Now let's take a look at his widely viewed Star Wars prequel video, and rip it apart one by one.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since my son.
There, that's how he starts. Does anyone have any respect for Red Letter Media these days? I mean, wasn't this the same guy who suggested J.J. Abrams should direct Star Wars movies, and then we saw how well that aged? Yeah, something I have to point out is that prequel hate back in the day was a trend, and very few people actually got into the meat of the issue. Since prequel hate is riddled with so many factual misconceptions like George Lucas was surrounded by yes men or Star Wars was saved in the edit, none of which are accurate or the full story. I think prequel hate is pathetic, because most of them are too delusional to get their problems with the prequels across effectively, and most of them seem to pivot off of what people said about the movies beforehand. Original thought and honesty is our lesson here. Even in a universally panned movie, I think people should have their own thoughts on why something failed. Point is, in relation to prequel hate, it was really misguided, built off of inaccurate stories about George Lucas, and I think those inaccurate stories are important, Because it's easier to buy into hatred of something if a behind-the-scenes fact is spun in the worst way possible, rather than looking at reality. People who didn't like the prequels made up stories about George Lucas to justify their newfound hatred of him, without checking to see if it was accurate, which it wasn't. So with that being said, what is the accurate narrative that prequel haters should have been spouting out all this time? Well, George Lucas was not so cocky and arrogant that he thought he could do it solo. He was actually left in a tough spot after conceptualizing the prequels, since no one he asked to help direct wanted to help him. So he was left doing all the important jobs by himself pretty much. With that context, George Lucas was not the villain. He was actually a victim of being left to dry because people refused to help him with parts of the film that weren't his forte in cinema. That's the narrative people should have been spouting all this time if they didn't like the movies. But they didn't do that. Sometimes I wish I could have been there with what we know now to dispel this notion that George Lucas ruined everything. Anyways, I think we should continue.
Yes, before I start this breakdown, I have to address the big red letter in the room. The Mr. Plinkett reviews by Red Letter Media are probably the best analysis of the Star Wars prequels on the internet, and unfortunately for me, they are incredibly in-depth.
Sure, bud, but here's a fun fact for you. Mike here didn't interview random people for his challenge of describing a character. Instead, he relied on his friends, who are obviously going to be like-minded, to talk trash about the movies for him. That kind of tells you that he unfairly manipulated his review to arrive at the conclusion that the prequels are bad. Even back then, I was wondering whether or not these people were unbiased sources, or people he deliberately knew would talk trash about the movies.
These movies have been around for a while, and there's almost nothing I can say that hasn't already been said by someone.
Well, actually you can, but that requires critical thinking skills. I'm getting really sick of hearing this, that people can't come up with anything new to say about the prequels, because that is just admitting that you haven't even tried to. This is kind of why I don't have any respect for prequel haters like Cosmotard here, because he just gave up before he began.
But you guys have been demanding that I review these movies for years now, and I do have a lot to say, so I'm just gonna go in with a clear mind and put the good old cosmonaut spin on things.
Yeah, let's see if Cosmotard has enough variety this hour.
Because I do not like these movies.
Heresy! But on the real, you've been one of those channels who jumped on the prequel hate bandwagon for years because you thought it was hip and cool. And I recall even you admitted that there were tons of prequel fans ripping on you in your utterly stupid and outdated Clone Wars recommendation, in which you admitted that you didn't even watch every single episode. This was in the days before The Last Jedi and prequel resurgence were in full force. I guess the prequels were more popular than people like to spin.
I barely even like them, ironically.
When it comes to someone like Cosmotard, I don't even believe him when he says that. He's a completely closeted prequel fan who thinks he can't go back on his position, except he can, but he thinks it'll be a sign of weakness. Now, I don't even know if I want someone like Cosmonaut admitting that he was in the prequel closet all this time, because he'll inevitably make other prequel fans look bad.
These movies are not a guilty pleasure for me, because when I watch them, I feel no pleasure, only guilt.
Yeah, this guy definitely likes the prequels a lot more than he's letting on. I'll say that much. Seriously, this guy falls so hard on prepositioned stances on Star Wars that it's clear that he's just pivoting towards the whole Plinkett perception that the prequels were the worst thing ever and it ruined their childhoods, blah 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 blah. I've been saying this often, but any dedicated Star Wars fan who hated the prequels would have been able to get over it pretty quickly. Unless you're gonna try and tell me that Dark Times and Legacy were garbage. And if that's the case, try and demonstrate it, because Legacy in particular is one of my favorites.
Like I said in the last video, you have to be brainwashed into liking these movies.
Yeah, and that's the first ridiculous take that makes you Cosmotarded. What kind of argument is that? Who the hell is brainwashed into liking something? You know what? I'm not going to answer that. Let's just see where he takes this.
I know this because I was brainwashed.
You know, the only people who consistently use the brainwashing argument are conspiracy theorists. I've been looking at a lot of flat earth content recently, and they constantly go on about indoctrination and brainwashing and pretending that science is doctrine. And unfortunately, it applies to other conspiracy theories, most of which are less ludicrous, like the moon landing and Stanley Kubrick. Prequel haters remind me of a lot of hardline conspiracy theorists, actually. They made up stories about the production of these movies without watching a single behind-the-scenes featurette. And now Cosmotard is claiming that he was brainwashed by these movies. Get real. The prequels, nor any theatrical movie, have subliminal messaging in them.
They came out with these boring-ass movies with a racist Jamaican caricature alien and
Yeah, Jar Jar ain't racist. People just linked him to stereotypical Jamaican features and calls it a day. I'm really sick of playing this clip, but let our boy George Lucas explain it like he did back in the day.
All your characterizations are quite definite, aren't they? I mean, where did this one come from?
The movie is pretty neutral. It is in outer space. These are aliens. How in the world you could take an orange amphibian and say that he's a Jamaican? I mean, even the idea of taking his ears and calling them dreadlocks is kind of a strange stretch as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's completely absurd.
Yeah, so the reality is that people saw stereotypes in the aliens, stereotypes that weren't actually there or intentional. Usually when I present this to hardline prequel haters, they just whine about how Jar Jar was too similar to a Jamaican stereotype, without actually acknowledging the point that they were very wrong. People assumed that George Lucas was being insensitive in the first place, when he wasn't, and they were just full of shit. When you learn that the stereotype argument is mostly made up, it really makes you wonder how much the aliens in the Phantom Menace actually resemble the stereotypes they're superficially assigned to. And I've mentioned this before, but people also state that the Nemoidians are stereotypes of Japanese people. But when I think of a stereotypical Japanese person, I think of a very honorable warrior who carries a sword around. And the last thing I think of is how Newt Gunray and friends are actually depicted.
and they sold us toys and video games and Halloween costumes.
Yeah, too bad you didn't play any of those video games. I saw how you tried both the Phantom Menace and Jedi Outcast, both of which came out in 1999 and 2002 respectively, and you were really having a hard time with them, since they're probably two of the most played Star Wars games of that era. So I find it absolutely disgusting to pretend that you were in that camp. You probably never played a Star Wars game until 2010, I guarantee you. The point is, you did not grow up with any of this shit. You're just making this up. And if you did, then you probably know that this whole perception about the prequels ruining everything was quite wrong. Because while the Plinkets were red with anger, the kids were enjoying their bounty hunters and the Jango Fett open seasons, maybe even both at the same time, since the comic wasn't unlockable in the actual game.
And this was my whole childhood. New movie, new video games, new toys, Star Wars potato chips, Star Wars candy, Star Wars was everywhere. And I liked Star Wars a lot, bro. I was watching Star Wars since before the prequels even came out.
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old.
It's too bad that you have me pressing X to doubt. Just like how I didn't believe Rian Johnson, I don't believe you, because you haven't done much on your channel to reflect your love for Star Wars. I was a nut for Star Wars too, and I started off investing in the games after I watched the movies. Starting with The Force Unleashed and Lego Star Wars, then I started to read the comics and novels, and the rest is history. You, on the other hand, have quite the tall tale when it comes to your experience with Star Wars. If you didn't play either The Phantom Menace or Jedi Outcast, then what did you play? Shadows of the Empire? Dark Forces? Maybe even KOTOR a little down the line? What on earth did you play? You don't say. So honestly, I'm thinking that you're making this up. You probably didn't even know what a Star Wars was until you were 20.
It truly fucking blows my mind that people are only just now mad at Star Wars for being a cash grab franchise that only cares about merchandise.
Star Wars wasn't a cash cow in the same way Disney Star Wars is a cash cow. When you look at the actual stories they had back then versus today, it's a night and day difference. You are looking at this from a film-only perspective, and it's annoying. Of course the films get the most amount of advertising, they're the biggest part of the franchise, but they are not the only part. I would have loved to see Star Wars commercials that advertised Darth Maul's Shadowhunter, but that wouldn't have been as practical.
They seriously act like Disney's the only reason Star Wars is trying to make money? What fucking planet have you been living on? Star Wars has always been like this.
I also really hate it when people pretend that Star Wars has always been the same. The term Disney Star Wars is a thing for a reason, you know? And a contrast in quality is one of them.
And when the prequel train started revving up, it was just time for more merchandise. It was a good time to be an impressionable little kid who loves Star Wars, and back then I didn't have the mental capacity to judge these movies. Nobody in my age group did.
Yeah, Cosmotard, if the prequels were so bad, then why did kids grow so attached to them compared to other kids' movies? Thinking about when I was a kid, the prequels were some of my favorites, and I watched a ton of great kids' movies. The early Pixar movies, the early DreamWorks movies, and so on and so forth. I even feel like back then, I understood the story of Star Wars better than the adults who constantly spewed myths about George Lucas and the movies he made. I understood the overarching story of Anakin Skywalker, how he fell to the dark side, and how he ultimately redeemed himself, and so on and so forth. And prequel haters can't even get the first thing right.
We saw the lightsabers and we were on board. We didn't give a shit. I think everybody has that moment where they're watching the prequels after having grown up a bit and they realize, Jesus Christ, what did I like about these movies?
You presume too much. Prequel hate never really convinced me even when I was entrenched back then. Because I started thinking, wait, so why didn't I hate these movies when I saw them for the first time? And the reasons given why, that we were all just dumb, impressionable kids never sat right with me. The prequels were insanely popular when I was in primary school, and I didn't even know prequel hate existed until I extensively used the internet. And it was quite the rude awakening.
That moment where you realize that you don't actually understand the plot of any of these movies, that they're boring and the acting is bad and there's just no good aspect to enjoy.
What planet are you living on, Cosmotard? I hope you're going to be able to back up the assertion that they make no sense, they're boring, and the acting is bad. I've referenced your horrendous takes on my channel in the past, and they were really stupid.
Once my generation got older and we realized these movies were bad, there was peace on the internet for a brief time.
Perhaps on the internet, not in reality.
It was widely accepted that the Star Wars prequels were not good movies.
Every time you show Plinkett interviewing his obviously biased friends on the prequels, I cease to take you seriously. It's clear that you put no thought into Plinkett's reviews, and the cheap way he made it.
And there wasn't anybody alive who unironically liked them.
Tell that to the Russians. Yeah, most English speakers in the West don't know this, but Russia really loves the prequels. From release all the way to today. And they hate the sequels too. True comrades.
There was no more world hunger, racism was over, and we as a species had finally achieved world peace.
Yeah, nah, all those problems you listed had only just begun.
And then Disney started making Star Wars movies.
This is a nightmare!
Yeah, I remember the Disney acquisition like it was yesterday. The average person was celebrating because that meant we would get more Star Wars movies. Prequel haters celebrated because they wanted Star Wars without George. But it's worth noting that there was one more demographic. Dedicated hardcore Star Wars nerds. You know, the ones heavily invested in the books. Yeah, they were very fearful that Disney was going to screw over Star Wars and the books over. And they did. I think their perspective at the time was actually very interesting, because being borderline experts on Star Wars lore and highly invested in the overarching story, had reservations about the whole Disney acquisition. That ended up being well placed in the end, but I don't even think even they knew how bad it would get. But still, to the average person, the Disney acquisition was met with more hope for Star Wars movies, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. So the reality is that different demographics had their own reaction to the Disney acquisition, and how it ultimately panned out. And that's still the case today. But let's just look at how average moviegoers thought of Disney's handling, and not dedicated Star Wars fans. That's all prequel haters have been anyways.
And now all of a sudden people are saying the prequels are good? What the fuck happened?
Yeah, I doubt the people writing these articles really gave a shit, but to someone like me, justice was served.
I've seen so many people unironically defend these movies and then turn around and shit on other bad movies like Suicide Squad or Batman v Superman, even though they all share the same exact issues. Overly expensive movies with bad effects and worse writing.
Bad effects and worse writing. That sounds like extremely broad problems and not specific problems. Let me tell you something, Cosmotard. If there was ever a difference between the prequels and the DC Extended Universe, it's that one was a corporatized attempt to copy the MCU, while the prequels were designed by Star Wars' creator to be an extension to the story he created. I don't think the DCEU films or the prequel trilogy can be reasonably compared when it comes to production history, or the stories they tried to tell, and how they were told. The DCEU didn't even have a story that was planned out properly. They made Man of Steel, and then rushed to a main event with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, without setting up Batman or Wonder Woman first, which they probably should have done. Now I'm getting off track, let's get back to the prequels.
And way too many people are saying that the prequels are redeemed because they're better than the new movies.
Yeah, you haven't listened to prequel fans much. I always loved the prequels and will continue to do so. They didn't need redeeming thanks to actual shitty corporate products. The most the sequels did was demonstrate the difference between the original creator and a corporate entity that saw the franchise as a cash cow, first and foremost. Of course, you're just pretending that Star Wars was always a corporate franchise, and it verifiably was not.
Now, first of all, the new movies aren't even that bad. I don't love every aspect of them, but I cannot call them bad movies.
I love how he just shows Rogue One, which was the movie that fared the best out of all the Disney Star Wars films, and was before the whole thing devolved into a complete mess. I probably didn't say this enough, but at least in the early years, there was at least some passion there. But even with something like Rogue One, it was hampered by a lot of production problems, thanks to Kathleen Kennedy. So odds are we would have gotten an even better movie if not for her handling. Yeah, so the fact that you don't love every aspect of Rogue One, blame Disney for that.
I honestly have full respect for people who hate the prequels and the sequels equally. I think that's totally fair.
I don't, because that demographic are typically jumping off a bandwagon of what they think is hip and cool, and not having any honest or original thoughts themselves. I think I was probably one of the first people to unapologetically turn against the Clone Wars, after I decided to read the Expanded Universe, and especially Star Wars Republic. And I realized that the Clone Wars pales in comparison. I got a lot of shit for telling people that I now hated it, but I wasn't gonna back down just because people were still attached to Ahsoka. Star Wars Republic really gave me some new perspective, and now I understand how people who didn't like TCW retcons at the time felt. Because Star Wars Republic is the better series, and was what deserved to be made into a show all along. It's basically like the people who played Fallout 3 first, thought it was a masterpiece, but then they played the 2 games before it, and their perspective really changed. That was me and my relationship to the Clone Wars. On an additional note, I also don't respect the demographic that say all Star Wars is good Star Wars, because typically they have no concept of quality control, and have no standards on what Star Wars actually is, nor can they tell the difference between Star Wars under George Lucas and Star Wars under Disney. And God forbid they don't understand what people who hate anything Disney, Star Wars, or even prequel hate even hate it for. They tend to just brush it off as toxic fans being toxic fans, without even looking to check if there's something deeper under it. And that's why I hate that demographic too.
What kills me is when people say these movies are good, and these aren't. Oh, at least the prequels had some original ideas. Who the fuck says shit like this?
I don't. I have to wonder if this guy has even done any research into prequel resurgence. Or he's just using sweeping statements made by a layperson, and not actual hardened prequel fans. Because that tends to be something that a layperson says. Or something that was said when prequel resurgence started, and not when more and more observations were made about the movies.
Original ideas aren't enough to make a movie good, and something can still be good without having original ideas. Stranger Things doesn't have a single original idea at all, and it's generally seen to be pretty good. Everybody likes it.
But here's the thing, Cosmotard. If you actually paid attention to someone like me, you'd know that the unoriginality of the sequels is just the beginning. The meat of the issue is that the sequels completely invalidate both the original and prequel trilogy. because in their pursuit to repeat the original trilogy for nostalgia's sake, they undid all the character arcs by hitting the reset button, and didn't have anything useful to offer in its place. The Force Awakens, for example, both ignored the prequel trilogy and didn't understand the original trilogy, the thing it was trying to imitate, and in the process, ruined everything, most especially the story. Compared to the old expanded universe, whether you want to argue that the Empire should have just collapsed there and then, they didn't reverse the characters and their achievements. And yeah, I know, Dark Empire exists. But I pointed out that Dark Empire was written before the prequels, so the overarching story of Anakin Skywalker didn't quite exist back then. Plus the meaning of his redemption and whatnot. I explain all of this in my Dark Empire review, but the point I'm making is that the sequels disregarded what happened in the original trilogy in its quest to cheaply imitate it. They are bad sequels because they do not effectively continue the story and in fact detract from the story previously told. Now in comparison, Stranger Things, even if it's unoriginal, did not affect the stories it was inspired by. Stranger Things was its own story, set in its own universe, that had nothing else but itself to make work. The sequels, by comparison, have a pre-existing universe to abide by. And the fact of the matter is that the sequels are really bad at being Star Wars movies, misunderstanding story themes, lore, and continuity, or even totally disregarding it. So as you can see, Cosmotard, you've looked at this from the surface level, and never dived deeper into any of the meat of these criticisms. Most of his review is like this, by the way.
The prequels have a lot of unique ideas, yeah, and they're not presented in a good way at all in these movies.
Yeah, the pod racing totally sucked, y'all. People only liked it because it was something that was actually happening in the movies, y'all. Did Cosmotard even think about what he was displaying on screen before he made that foolish statement?
If you thought this was going to be a video about me praising the prequels, then I'm sorry. You probably don't know me very well. Maybe we can be friends in another life.
Will you be out of the closet in your next life? I sure hope so. Otherwise, no thanks.
Today, I'm going to try and bring these movies back down a peg. Because I hate them, and when people disagree with me, I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I know Cosmotard is making a joke, but I also think he's serious. Prequel haters became very, very insecure when their propaganda was seen for what it was. And they tried to put out the fire to no avail. Grow a spine, dude.
Now, before I start tearing into the movie, I should be fair and talk about the good things. This isn't the worst movie ever made, so it has to have some positive qualities, right?
Yeah, let's see if he actually is fair.
So, the music is pretty good.
Yeah, John Williams blew our balls off. And the reason he didn't when the sequels came out is because both J.J. Abrams and Ryan Roundhead didn't work with him very well. J.J. Abrams, for example, mostly rejected John Williams' new compositions that actually would have made The Force Awakens stand out where it desperately needed some originality, and told him to make it like the original trilogy instead. What a hack.
The thing is, almost every aspect of this movie that's sort of okay has a little asterisk right above it.
That being that it's not sort of okay, it's actually great.
I want to say the effects are good because a lot of them are technically very impressive. For a movie that came out in 1999, Jar Jar looks pretty good.
Yeah, he does. I wish more people would think about technical achievements when it comes to movies, and not just shit on them because the effects of the time don't line up with today. When today obviously has a massive advantage. That's one of the biggest ways prequel haters were pretty unfair. That and they just shat on them because it wasn't practical 100% of the time. Which shows you how ungrateful they are, considering how practical the Phantom Menace in particular actually was.
But the effects aren't always integrated into the movie in a convincing way.
I love how he doesn't even give an example. Did you see a bootleg version of the movie filmed on a camera in the theater with Chinese subtitles? If not, you probably have the attention span of a goldfish. Cosmotard also does a terrible job explaining why he thinks the movies are boring, as we'll get to.
I mean, the pod racing scene is pretty cool because it's the only time in the movie where you feel like you're not dead. That's probably the only enjoyable scene other than the final battle. And I'd say the final battle is the one scene that is so cool it tricked people into liking this movie for just a little bit after it came out.
Oh, so that's the part that had the subliminal messages, is that it? Kinda strange that they put mind control at the end of the movie instead of at the start.
Sometimes an exciting ending can fool an audience into thinking a movie is good.
Now you've got a problem with Rogue One? Didn't you say earlier that the Disney movies were not bad movies, with Rogue One specifically overlaid?
And this final battle is actually pretty dope. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to enjoy it when you realize that you don't care about any of the things that are happening in this movie.
Yeah, I guess the subliminal messaging wasn't that effective then. Where's Grigory Rasputin when you need him?
There is also one single line that I kind of like in this movie.
Perhaps I killed a Jedi and took it from him.
I don't think so. No one can kill a Jedi.
I wish that was so.
I kind of like the subtle foreshadowing in that line, and that's one of the only times I'm ever going to call these movies subtle, so enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's because you didn't catch on to anything else. Man, what psychic did they hire for the production of this movie, as you've suggested they did?
But the main positive in this movie is definitely the music.
Yeah, the music you just played, it's actually an upbeat version of the Emperor's theme, perfectly disguised to foreshadow the rest of the saga. That flew over your head, didn't it?
The John Williams score is always the one aspect of these movies that is on point. I want to believe that old Johnny saw these movies and was like, okay, I gotta try to fix these as best as I can.
I don't know. Seems like a lot more passion went into the score than even the original trilogy. Really seems like John Williams was just building off of what he already did, topped with the proper collaboration he did with George Lucas. Those were the days.
But it is kind of unintentionally funny sometimes because you'll be visually looking at nothing happening in these movies, but the music will be popping the fuck off.
They're storming the palace to capture the Viceroy, dumbass. Did you not check the continuity of where this shot is placed? Same with the one you showed afterwards. Anakin is literally marching in to interfere with the confrontation between Mace Windu and Palps. I also like how this isn't even a real criticism. And it makes me question how you were so bored by the Phantom Menace, even though the music was very lively even when there was, quote, nothing that was happening on screen. I mean, imagine putting a sick soundtrack in front of an actually boring movie like paint drying, which is literally just a 10-hour shot of paint drying on a brick wall, intentionally made to be the most tedious thing to watch ever. In fact, let's do it right now.
But that's all I can say in the way of praise. These movies honestly fail at almost every level of filmmaking.
Heresy!
So we are going to watch this movie with the same framework that we watched A New Hope in. For the first time, I'm going to try to watch this movie with my fully evolved film brain. I'm going to pretend as if I have never seen this movie before.
Good luck with that. That's impossible to do. I remember in his Return of the Jedi video, he said something eerily similar, and then he just fell into pre-placed biases against the movie. This guy's perspective on the prequels is not fresh or original. It's mostly based on what Plinkett said. And since Plinkett is apparently the god of film criticism, that means that he's always correct. The fact that he actually tries to suggest that he's going to look at this from the perspective of a new viewer is just him trying to say that he's going to be unbiased, and failing miserably because that's impossible. You should have just said that this is your critical reassessment of the film.
And right off the bat, the opening title crawl is just too much.
Yeah, 3 paragraphs completely threw you off track. Were you just too stupid to understand what a blockade is?
Remember when I talked about how perfect the title crawl is in A New Hope? It's simple, effective, and it doesn't throw too much information at us. This is the first paragraph in the Phantom Menace title crawl.
Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying stars.
Yeah, you kind of need a brain to understand what the crawl is saying. It's the bare minimum, but morons like you didn't even try to assess it properly.
This is the first indication of the tone of the movie. It's fucking boring.
Bold. Let's see how you explain it as boring.
There are no signs of life in this movie at all. The performances are stiff. The lines are dry and lifeless, and the movie isn't even directed in an engaging way. Everybody kind of talks the same, and it's really awkward. Like, who the fuck talks like this?
This is incredible. We recommend a commission be sent to Naboo to ascertain the truth.
The Congress of Malastare concurs with the Honorable Delegate from the Trade Federation.
Yeah, this is what prequel haters are best at. Playing a random line in the movie and expecting their audience to cringe at it. I like how the best argument is literally just, who talks like this? And then picking out a line from one of the political scenes. I'm pretty sure these guys in the Senate are speaking in a loud and clear formal voice during a political discussion. Cosmotard is relying on his audience being either complete morons or not fans of the movie to begin with. But to anyone who doesn't fit that demographic, it's pretty easy to deconstruct. There is no analysis of the line. Just a quick playing it out of context, and then Cosmotard asserts that it's unnatural dialogue or line delivery. It's not.
When you start the movie, you might think that the Jedi just talk in this weird, overly wordy way because they're like warrior monks. I kind of accept the fact that they talk weird. But everybody fucking talks like this, except the Jamaican and the literal child.
So far, you've cited like one example. That being a political scene in which the characters were once again talking in a loud and clear formal manner. Cosmotard here is assuming that everyone is already on his side, and by using the baseless cliche arguments against the prequels, he isn't doing much to sway people who already like the movies. I don't understand how you could be this bad at trying to talk to prequel fans. Prequel haters like Cosmotard cannot adapt to modern times where prequel fans already have these defenses for surface level jabs, even back when this video was new. This is also the reason why my reviews are so long, because unlike Cosmotard who just brushes over the movies, I actually go into them on a scene-by-scene basis.
And while they may sound different, their line delivery is on another fucking level.
You mean I get to come with you in your starship?
Man, I'm gonna start calling you no context Cosmotard the rate you're going. Why do you think Anakin learning that he's no longer a slave and he gets to leave Tatooine makes for bad dialogue, or line delivery, or whatever the fuck you're trying to criticize the movie for?
See, George has this weird problem where his dialogue is kind of the worst thing about his movies. I'm not lying, man. Even in the original Star Wars, the instant classic, his actors constantly made fun of him for his dialogue.
And then I started reading, and it seemed to me the dialogue was pretty ropey.
It's a true story. Harrison Ford, who plays the space pirate in the film, at one point threatened to tie George up and make him say his own lines at gunpoint.
On top of how he shows no context for either clip, I thought it was rather rich that he cited Sir Alec Guinness, who famously hated everything Star Wars. Of course he's not going to have nice things to say about the dialogue. He literally called it fairy tale rubbish. Then we've got the clip with Mark Hamill, who in this clip referenced Harrison Ford. Not himself, but Harrison Ford questioning George's dialogue. Yeah, well, in case you didn't know Cosmotard, Harrison Ford famously didn't give a shit about Star Wars either, beyond a means to boost his then lacking film resume. He was always more of an Indiana Jones guy anyways, so literally in those two sources, they come from an actor who hated being in Star Wars, and Mark Hamill referencing his co-star who also didn't like Star Wars. This is as flimsy evidence as it gets.
But back then, he had a team to help him fix up the script and make it sound like lines that real people would say.
And what's your source for this? Red Letter Media? Or just you, because you made it up?
Star Wars should be simple.
He said the thing. Star Wars should be simple, y'all. Yeah, this is how you know this guy lied about being a book reader. Because this is something a book reader would never say. Someone who knows a lot about the source material and whatnot. This isn't even a real argument. Star Wars doesn't have to dumb itself down just because you don't understand the mythos with your third grade education. You must have really had a hard time with something like Knights of the Old Republic 2, if you even played that game at all.
We just saw Han Solo talking like a regular fucking guy, and now all the characters talk like weird Shakespeare robots.
I have to wonder how taking cues from the Bard is somehow a bad thing. Shouldn't we all be taking cues from Shakespeare? He's like the stereotypical example of a master storyteller. How dare George get some inspiration from him when writing his own stories?
And that's a word that I've heard people use to describe this dialogue. Shakespearean. But that's honestly using the word wrong, in my opinion.
Let me guess. It's because Shakespearean is actually far too much of a compliment for the prequels in your deluded opinion.
I've always seen a work as Shakespearean when we talk about how the actions of the characters dictate their emotions. It's less about what they say and more about how they feel. It's not just Shakespearean because they talk funny. It's annoying, and it makes it impossible to connect to the characters. And this manner of speech makes it so that we never really know who these characters are on a deeper level, because none of these characters have character traits.
The Phantom Menace uses basic archetypes for its story, and I'd hardly call it a character-driven story. I'm also getting really sick of these general sweeping statements without anything to show for it.
They also never talk about how they feel, and all of the dialogue is just to tell us what is literally happening in the story.
Still nothing to show for it, but let's analyze each clip as he shows on screen.
Take all the dialogue scenes in this movie and think about what their purpose is in the story.
I'm ready.
2 characters explaining where they are and what they're doing.
Yeah, I specifically went back to the scene in question and analyzed every word. This guy is full of shit. Obi-Wan talks about how he senses something elusive in relation to the whole blockade, but he can't pinpoint what it is, and his master Obi-Wan gives him some wisdom. So bottom line, Obi-Wan is talking about how he can sense something is off, and Qui-Gon is telling him to be mindful of his thoughts and whatnot. Now, I've discussed before how the Phantom Menace actually has an effective opening in my opinion. The music can be really described as elusive, as the Republic ship slowly docks on the Trade Federation's ship, and the 2 main characters in this story are initially presented as hooded figures, as they're led to the meeting room to meet with the Viceroy. So in line with this approach, why wouldn't they be talking about something being off about this blockade? This is a vibe that's expressed in various points in the movie. So the point I'm making is that Cosmotard is basically asserting that the characters don't talk about their feelings or why something is going on. And that's dead wrong. Sorry that they weren't quipping about it like a Marvel film.
Characters coming up with a plan.
Yeah, I also had a look at the following scene and analyzed the dialogue closely. This scene consists of the droid telling the 2 relevant Trade Federation characters that the ambassadors are Jedi Knights, and they both visibly express fear at this, with Rune Harko stating, quote, "They're here to force a settlement." And Newt Gunray then opts to contact Darth Sidious while the Jedi are distracted. That's where they stall the Jedi by having the droid bring them something to drink. About 1,000,000 times I've heard, why didn't they poison the drinks? But on top of that being irrelevant, since they opt to gas the room moments later anyways, I'd like to hear why the Trade Federation would conveniently have poison of all kinds for this occasion. Also, in case you didn't watch the movie, this scene comes before Darth Sidious tells them to execute the Jedi. And the reason they didn't do so of their own accord beforehand is pretty simple. Imagine the consequences of trying to kill not 1, but 2 Jedi.
Characters coming up with a plan.
Yeah, let's just skip over the action sequence that preceded this scene. Plus the ignoring of the sly comment that's made after Qui-Gon organizes the allegedly boring plan.
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
Characters coming up with a plan and meeting someone new.
Yeah, Cosmotard did just skip over the Viceroy talking to Queen Amidala, the communications being disrupted, and a sequence showing off the invasion. If it isn't obvious enough, Cosmotard skimmed through the movie instead of watching it beginning to end.
Characters making a deal and coming up with a plan.
Skipping over to the swim to the Gungan city and being taken to Boss Nass, do you just not know how this movie is structured? Okay, I'm just gonna skip over this part, because all Cosmotard does is baselessly assert that the Phantom Menace is full of characters just talking about what's going on. He's very wrong, and he skips over scenes to make the movie seem boring. Also, Cosmotard thinks that Padme was flirting with Anakin, when she wasn't. He was misinterpreting the dialogue, or making a huge stretch, like prequel haters always do.
Do you see the fucking problem here? There are very few scenes of our characters being normal people and expressing emotions in this movie.
I mean, you didn't really spend any time dissecting any of the scenes, so I can't trust you when you say that. Something really weird about prequel haters is that a lot of them make videos that act like they are the ultimate deconstruction of the movies, but they rarely assess scenes from beginning to end. It's mostly just sweeping assertions.
There is legitimately only one scene of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon talking to each other about anything that isn't the immediate plot. The only time they have a fucking heart-to-heart is at the end of the movie.
Again, not quite sure I believe you on that one.
For 99% of the runtime, these characters have no relationship to one another, and we never learn how they feel about each other.
This is starting to get annoying. Are you going to cite specifics, or are you just going to make general statements that prequel fans like me are obviously going to point out are wrong? and just pass on by like you actually proved any point.
Yet we're expected to care when this happens.
Ouch! Call someone to check my ears.
This movie also has some of the most flat performances I've ever seen.
I don't fully understand. This is a strange place to me.
No context, Cosmotard strikes again. This is a common theme with this guy. This guy isn't really doing much to change the minds of prequel fans because it clearly has no idea how to speak to people like me. The baseless jabs got old years ago.
There is zero chemistry between any of these actors. Zero. I mean, literally, no chemistry.
Do I have to repeat how he just expects the audience to automatically agree with him? Come to think of it, 45 minutes is far from enough time to go over every defense made for the prequels. Not that Cosmotard addresses a single one.
This movie is not fun to watch. It's not even fun to make fun of.
I don't know. As much as you're complaining about the movie being stale or whatever, you did throw some quips in there. So maybe you like this deconstruction more than you're letting on.
Now, people have been making fun of this new scene from The Rise of Skywalker because of this particular line.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
Oh yeah, the scene that pretends Disney invented jet troopers, when they've been video game enemies since at least Dark Forces in 1995. That was the age of using DOS to run video games on your computer, and there's probably an earlier example anyways. Also, it's a line that is completely out of place, and detracts from any suspense or tension the scene was trying to have. It's a J.J. Abrams trope to just rush through a movie, and have constant quips to keep it constantly entertaining. It's a pretty short-term way of making the movie enjoyable, because it's going to wear off the second time onwards and just get annoying. So on top of it being incorrect in-universe, it's also a scene breaker.
Oh, it's too quippy. It sounds like Marvel dialogue. Okay, yeah, whatever. Let's talk about this for a second, though. Compare this chase scene to a chase scene from this movie.
Out of all the chase sequences you chose, you picked the one that you think is the most boring. There's also the escape from Naboo, which I think is better in line with the type of scene that Rise of Skywalker was trying to be.
Our heroes are going to be eaten by a giant monster. I wonder how they feel about this. Oh, they don't really care. These characters just can't be bothered to give a shit at all.
Yeah, except for Jar Jar, the clumsy one, compared to the Tomb Warrior monks who are trained for dangerous stuff like this. Also, in case you forgot how the scene ends, the trio are bailed out by a bigger fish, and Qui-Gon directly makes a remark about it, meaning that he was expecting a bigger fish to come by and save them. It's meant to show us how well he can read a situation in its true threat level.
Just relax. Relax.
Okay, yeah, man, I won't worry.
Man, you must hate Jar Jar so much that you won't even acknowledge him. Huge L.
Even when they're planning the final battle, they don't care.
Once we're inside, we shouldn't have a problem.
Oh yeah, won't be a problem. No use in me being emotionally invested.
Gee, another out of context line. Even with the limited showcase of the line, you can tell that Panaka here was clearly at the end of stating the plan. Meaning that he was saying that if it goes to plan, it should be easy to take back Naboo. I also failed to see how this is a knockback against the movie. Have you ever heard of overconfidence that a plan will work? Wasn't Return of the Jedi, for example, built off of a trap the Emperor laid that the rebels had to overcome? Oh wait, you didn't like that movie. And last I remember, the Battle of Naboo doesn't go off exactly to plan. Qui-Gon is killed, and the Gungans actually initially lose the battle and have to be bailed out in the space battle up above. And so on and so forth. The battle seems pretty reactionary to me.
The movie has low stakes, low energy, and it really doesn't allow you to engage with it in the same level that you would with any other Star Wars movie.
You've done a pretty poor job demonstrating that.
So yeah, personally, I'll take these corny, energetic performances over this shit any day of the fucking week, but hey, that's just me.
Well, you're right about one thing, it is just you.
So anyway, let's talk about the actual plot, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I have never known the plot of this movie until now.
That's really embarrassing. And pathetic. Weird Al was able to figure it out before the film even came out, and he was able to make a parody of American Pie out of it. I also find it weird that the self-proclaimed book-reading Star Wars nerd doesn't even know what Episode 1 is about. This guy absolutely hasn't read Darth Plagueis, or Cloak of Deception, or Darth Maul's Shadowhunter, or the Phantom Menace novelization. How can you claim to be a die-hard nerd if you don't even know the source material on the most basic level?
Most of the times when I watch this movie, it's with friends where we just quote the awkward or funny moments until we get bored and turn it off halfway through.
Cosmotard kinda just admitted that he didn't even try to watch the movie.
But as far as the plot goes, I am only just now piecing it together after having watched this movie for 20 years.
Except you never watched the movie, as you just admitted.
That is not a good sign.
Yeah, it's not. You are such a fraud, claiming to be a book reader, while someone like me is breaking his back going out of his way to be a Star Wars everyman.
But hey, maybe it's just me, right? Maybe I'm the dumbass who just doesn't get it.
Yep. Gonna get your fanboys to bail you out?
So I even asked you guys on Twitter if you knew the plot of this movie. And most of you didn't.
What? The ratio is a tad off half. 41% said yeah, they understood the plot, while the other 59% said no. That's not most. That's a tad over half. You can also tell that this poll was full of people like me trying to counteract what Cosmotard was trying to do to prove his shitty point. So Cosmotard basically lied and said that most people said so. No, Cosmotard, most of half of people said so. Now, I might come off as really technical here, but you can tell Cosmotard did a lot to spin this as majority opinion, and ignoring the 41%. Out of nearly 10,000 votes who said that they understood the movie. In fact, maybe I'll do the same poll one day.
I actually expected most of you guys to lie or just check the wiki, but no, you guys were pretty honest for once.
Yeah, anyone who says that they understand the movie is lying. I guess this is why he decided to ignore the significant 41%, because he just shrugs them all off as lying. Even though this is his own poll, as someone biased against the prequel trilogy.
And I don't think this is because the plot is overly complicated. I mean, it is, but that's not why we don't understand it.
Oh, here we go again with Star Wars having to be simple.
It's because the plot is not conveyed properly to the audience. For a movie that's mostly just our characters telling us what they're going to do and then doing that thing with no diverging paths, this movie is really bad at conveying what the story is.
Are you sure it wasn't just you being too stupid to understand the story? I don't even know how you express so much confidence that these movies suck if you didn't even get it.
The story is presented to us in a way where we cannot understand it unless we can read the minds of the characters.
Basically indirect confirmation that you didn't read the novelization of this movie either. I have to wonder how many books Cosmotard has actually read. My guess is gonna be 0.
In this movie, information is conveyed in a very strange and vague way. Take, for example, the scene where Anakin is being interviewed by the Jedi Council. They ask him some random questions, and then they say, sorry, he's evil, we cannot train him.
Actually, they said he was too old. Where on earth did you get the idea that they said he was evil, and what does that even mean, this far into the story? Another thing I have to note is that prequel haters really struggle with relaying the story of these movies accurately, and they tend to flat out make stuff up. This is why I personally doubt the credibility of criticisms like stale performances and wooden dialogue, because the same people will also rip on the movies for things that didn't actually happen in them. Consistency and accuracy is our lesson here. The Phantom Menace has been out for 2 decades. It's time you get the story straight.
They say they sense fear in Anakin, and that is the main reason why he's not to be trained. So you're telling me you expect the kid to just not be scared at all?
Here comes Cosmotard not understanding Jedi recruitment practices.
Wouldn't it make more sense to train someone to be less fearful than to just expect them to have the emotions of a Jedi once they get here?
Yeah, that's why they recruit toddlers who can hardly remember their parents at all, so that they are a blank slate, and they can be trained in Jedi values and discipline as quickly as possible.
They know he's strong in the Force, but they still tell Qui-Gon that he can't train him. But what's the alternative? Just send him back home and hope he doesn't harness his inherent Force powers?
What makes you think he'll be able to do that without any training?
Training to become a Jedi is not an easy challenge. And even if you succeed, it's a hard life.
Yeah, this criticism is based on the assumption that The Force Awakens and The Phantom Menace consistently coexist. They don't. And it's why I'm very critical of the former. The Force is not magic, and even then, Harry Potter required education to do so. There were 7 books about it, in fact. But the point is, Force use without training or at least some sort of practice is something The Force Awakens completely made up. Believing in the Force is not a thing. J.J. Abrams and friends literally made that up. There are contrasting quotes between how George Lucas described the Force versus J.J. But I think Cosmotard knows all this. It's just that he struggled to come up with a means of criticizing the movie, so he literally just cited a future movie George had nothing to do with that provided contradictory information about the previous films, and acts like The Force Awakens breaking the rules means that it falls on the Phantom Menace retrospectively. It doesn't. Moving on.
And Qui-Gon just says, oh, well, I'm just going to train him anyway. You're just allowed to do that? You can just do whatever you want? If you can do that, then why does anybody ask for permission?
No, he's defying the Council. Anakin isn't even officially inducted into the Jedi Order until the very end, where the Council respects his dying wish to have Anakin trained.
The boy is dangerous.
Okay, but why? Literally just tell us why. Somebody please tell me something.
Once again, you didn't watch the movie, and now I'm forced to go to this specific scene and listen to the full exchange myself. You pretty much brushed over the previous scene, which this scene is built off of. The Council didn't want to train Anakin because he's both too old and they sense an uncertain future with him. When Obi-Wan says the boy is dangerous, this is what he's referring to. Qui-Gon then places his faith in Anakin and tells Obi-Wan that the Council said his future is uncertain. And he suggests that this isn't direct confirmation that he's dangerous. Yeah, the more you actually watch the scene and assess the dialogue, the more stupid Cosmotard appears. Maybe you should watch the movie.
Please, sir, may I have some movie?
I'll plop some Phantom Menace in your bowl, but the rest is up to you.
Even when you look at the finer details of the movie, there's shit that just doesn't make any sense. For instance, why would you bring Anakin to a war zone? Qui-Gon already has an apprentice, and now he just grabbed another one and brought him along to the war.
Yeah, this can easily be explained as Qui-Gon personally keeping Anakin under his watch and not trusting anyone else to take care of him. He could leave him somewhere safe, but the thing is that he didn't trust anyone else to keep Anakin safe.
Anakin, stay where you are. You'll be safe there.
But
Stay in that cockpit.
You stay here.
But Rick!
No buts.
Oh wow, Qui-Gon giving Anakin a place to hide to keep him safe? What bad writing, am I right?
Also, why would you go down to Naboo in separate ships? It's kind of a throwaway line, and it ends up not mattering in the long run, but from a logistical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. You guys could just go on the same ship. You're really fucking lucky they parked next to each other.
How does this affect the movie story to such an extent where it magically breaks it? Also, bold of you to assume that the two adjacent ships in the hangar wouldn't reasonably land near each other when invading Naboo. This guy, despite having years of prequel hate to go off of, doesn't even have any good arguments to bring to the table.
What does Palpatine want to accomplish with this fucking trade blockade?
Isn't it obvious? Securing power. Make the current Chancellor look weak and ineffective at handling the crisis and get himself voted in. Then he can slowly acquire more and more power as Chancellor until he's Emperor. I really liked how there's a span of 13 years between these movies, so the takeover didn't happen all in one day. This plan was 1,000 years in the making.
This is his most roundabout and complicated plot ever, and he's already known for those. He has no problem with killing the Jedi in the beginning, but he's just gonna try and convince Padme politely to accept his terms. He doesn't have any problem trying to kill her in the later movies. I don't understand this man.
You know, this guy mumbling made me so confused that I honestly lost track. What does killing the Jedi have to do with getting the Queen to forcibly sign a treaty to make the invasion legal? Are you saying that the Jedi have to sign the contract too? You don't even try to analyze if there are any changing circumstances in episode 2. Which there are, considering Padme isn't even Queen anymore. This is so pathetic and easy to deconstruct. If there was ever a central criticism I had for this review, it's that Cosmotard, despite knowing about rising prequel resurgence, didn't actually try to analyze or understand it. He just repeated the same points someone would make in 2012. If you don't understand your enemy, you are doomed to fail. Prequel fans at the time already had a defense for all of these before Cosmotard made these stupid complaints.
What does he even want? I always found it strange that Palpatine's ultimate goal is to just be president and rule everything.
Why not? Why the hell does Palpatine have to be this guy who has a higher motive other than power? Do you just not understand what the role of a villain should be? Well, actually, yes, that's the correct answer.
It seems like a really simple-minded goal for someone who's supposedly so wise and attuned to the Force. Normally, I don't really care if a villain's motivations are simplistic, especially in Star Wars.
Especially in Star Wars. This guy is still pushing the idea that Star Wars should be simple. Unbelievable.
But this is a movie that's trying to be more complex than the previous films, and it's just not very good at it.
You've done a piss poor job explaining why Star Wars always has to be simple, why it was simple, why the prequels being more complex detracts from the overarching story, and so many other issues that I might just lose my mind. I'm sorry, bud, but this film is more complex than the previous films is not a criticism.
The entire plot of all three of these movies revolve around Palpatine's schemes, and his schemes never make any sense.
This is coming from the guy who admitted without any embarrassment or shame that he couldn't understand the Phantom Menace, and also ignored the significant 41% on his own poll who had their brains wired.
There's also this thing with the prequels where you can sometimes take a single line and try to analyze it, and it just doesn't make any sense from a simple writing perspective.
Yeah, take a line out of context. That seems to be one of the biggest ways people rip on the prequels. No analysis of the lines surrounding it. In one of my previous videos, I pointed out how supposed writing advice channel Brandon McNulty tried to make a criticism over Anakin calling Obi-Wan master constantly, without actually showing what Obi-Wan was saying that invokes such a response.
I'm serious, this is in every single one of these movies.
A communications disruption can mean only one thing: invasion.
No, it doesn't. You're telling me that if your communications get messed up, the only reason is that you're being attacked?
In case you didn't realize, they were being blockaded at least the past few days. So it's not an unreasonable assumption to make. Even if he was wrong, which he wasn't, it's a pretty solid guess. This isn't a typical communications outage, you fool.
You've made a commitment to the Jedi Order, a commitment not easily broken.
Not easily broken? You mean not easily maintained?
Oh wow, finally a poorly worded piece of dialogue. We finally get to throw Cosmotard a bone here. I just wish he analysed the whole exchange, or even the whole movie scene by scene.
The oath itself is very easily broken.
That's why Anakin kept it secret? Man, this guy sucks at critiquing movies.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
But Obi-Wan, that in itself is an absolute statement.
Taking the dialogue as literally as possible and trying to poke holes in it is retarded. Other times, prequel haters don't take the dialogue literally enough, especially when they need to for a proper analysis. Also, in case you didn't watch the movie, Anakin in turn made an absolute statement that if he wasn't with them, then he was his enemy. So obviously Obi-Wan had every right to call out the nature of the Sith. You might not remember what the movie is called, but I do.
George is not good at writing dialogue. It would be very funny if it wasn't so sad.
This is literally something you can do to any movie to make it look bad. You don't even try to analyze the dialogue. You just fall into the pitfall of cherry-picking lines and trying to trash them because they weren't quippy Marvel one-liners. Star Wars is not Marvel, and it's also not Terminator. I say this because Disney has been trying to turn Star Wars into an MCU-like franchise with Disney Plus shows out the arse. And George Lucas has stated on the other hand that Star Wars is not Terminator. And it's not a cold and dark action film full of blood and violence.
And I should now probably mention the one thing people say is the biggest problem with this movie: Jar Jar.
The alleged racial stereotype. Let's go.
Honestly, all of the other issues in this movie are actually worse than Jar Jar.
That moment where you've gone so far off the rails that the most heavily cited criticism becomes one of the best parts. How consistent of you.
Lifeless performances, bad dialogue, a convoluted plot.
I love how you showed Qui-Gon controlling a blue and red dice as a convoluted plot. It's clear you were struggling to actually find an appropriate overlay for this.
And an overall lack of direction are all things that I hate way more than one dumb character. And if we're being real, while he's annoying, his role in the story actually makes more sense than Anakin's.
Huh?
The worst thing about Jar Jar is that you literally cannot understand what he's saying.
Sounds like a you problem. If you can't understand what a character is saying, then it doesn't really fall on the movie at all. Sorry, but this is not a valid criticism.
I watched this movie with subtitles for the first time, and I only now, 20 years later, have understood what the fuck Jar Jar has been saying.
Me say day starting pity okie day with the brisky morning munchin', then boom! I have no fucking clue what you just said, but hell yeah, man. I'm gonna speak my truth.
Are you sure that was even the best clip to mock that one-off line?
But despite this, they actually need Jar Jar around for most of the movie. I really hate admitting it, but he's so integral to this dumb-ass story that you kind of need him here more than you need the other characters.
Other prequel haters, I imagine, aren't even going to agree with even that. So the fact that saying this with no explanation why is really telling. Oh, who am I kidding? It doesn't really matter if other prequel haters agree with the specifics or not, as long as you are trashing the movie.
However, it doesn't make any sense that you bring him into Mos Eisley with Qui-Gon and not Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the main characters.
Someone has to stay on the ship and protect the Queen. Jesus Christ. I really hate reciting the whys and hows to prequel haters over and over. They're never gonna get it anyways.
Actually, I take that back. I can't even say he's a main character in this movie. It is truly baffling to me how small Obi-Wan's role is in this movie.
He's literally the secondary POV character aside from Qui-Gon, so you're not making any sense at all. Also, no elaboration on why or how. More sweeping statements from a guy who expects you to already hate these movies.
I think the only reason people are moved by Qui-Gon's death is because Qui-Gon gets way more screen time. He's closest to being the main character.
He is the main character. Been taking a page out of Plinkett's book, I assume.
And just think about how much characterization Obi-Wan has in episodes 2 and 3. In episode 2 and 3, you find out that he doesn't really like flying that much. That's kind of a cute character trait. I wish he had traits in this movie.
You know, at this rate, I have to wonder why quirky character traits are so important in a movie that's not character-focused. I don't think the two Jedi are even the most characterized in the film despite being the POV characters. They mostly fit the role of being the vessels to experience the story, and that's just fine. Still, there's always something off about people who rip on Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan for being stoic or whatever. They're thinking about the characterization in the wrong way, and also not thinking about their role in the story or how they were designed.
The only character with traits in this movie is, again, Jar Jar.
Even Brandon McNulty admitted that Anakin had a personality too.
So yeah, while Jar Jar is really awkward and a fucking stupid addition to the movie, he's the only thing in the movie that feels real. Whenever I watch this movie and he shouts this line, I seriously wake up from the coma that this movie put me in.
I'd rather you stay in that coma. Also, at this rate, boring is not a criticism.
If he wasn't in the movie, I legitimately think the movie would be worse. Think about it. It would just be these dry humans delivering boring dialogue. It would be so boring that I don't think I'd be able to sit through it.
Again, boring, not a criticism. Try harder.
Honestly, in order to fix this movie, you would need to reformat the entire plot. Everything is broken.
Says the guy who didn't even know the story for 20 plus years.
Most people agree that the biggest problem here is that you can just delete this whole movie from the trilogy and it changes nothing. A lot of Star Wars viewing guides actually recommend that you just don't watch this movie. How sad is that?
A lot of viewing guides also tell you to watch the original trilogy first, just because of a plot twist that everybody already knows, and is perhaps the most spoiled thing in cinema history. And also an inability to understand how the prequels rearrange the viewing experience. But yeah, let's trust those guides regardless.
The spin-off movies are equally useless in the grand scheme of things, but those movies are fun and a little experimental, so I don't really mind them. They don't really hurt anybody by existing.
Solo in particular was a checklist full of Han Solo origin story plot points that could have just been a novel. And it was actually once a novel. The Phantom Menace, I'm sorry to say to you, someone who didn't even understand it, is very, very important to the story. The Phantom Menace plants the roots of how the Clone Wars started, the origin of Anakin Skywalker, the Sith Grand Plan, and so many other things. So in reality, you need it.
This movie really hurts my feelings by existing. It just genuinely bothers me whenever I watch it.
I don't even think you watched it at all, and in this case, you absolutely need a rewatch, although I fear it's already too late for you.
There's no main character.
Wrong.
The characters that are in this movie don't have any traits or personalities.
Not the point or goal.
And if you try to break this movie into a beginning, middle, and end, you would have trouble finding out where each part begins.
Act 1, Jedi arrive at Naboo, survive an ambush, go to the surface, rescue the Queen and narrowly escape. Act 2, everything on Tatooine. Act 3, everything on Coruscant. Then the return to Naboo where the climax happens. Not surprising that this guy said this, given he once again admitted that he doesn't even know the story of this movie.
Nothing in this movie works at all. This one is a really big disappointment, and if I was an adult when I watched this movie, I don't think I would even like Star Wars anymore. And the worst part is, we still have 2 more movies to go.
I watched this movie on repeat constantly as a kid, and I only got sick of it when I was eager to hop onto episode 2.
3 out of 10, I hope it doesn't get any worse than this.
Yeah, your review is pretty bad so far.